The Valtheran Empire was very big. It ruled over 15 star systems, each with billions of people living on planets and space stations. Queen Morgathia was the ruler, and you didn't want to mess with her. She had built her empire with strength, smart choices, and a will of iron that never gave in to anyone. The queen had something more valuable than all of her warships and planets put together. She had 4 girls. These princesses weren't like the ones you see at fancy parties wearing expensive clothes. No, these 4 young women had something special in their blood. Their DNA was not the same. Researchers have been looking into it for years and found that their DNA held secrets that could move the whole Valtheran species forward by hundreds of years. They could live longer, think faster, and get used to places that would kill normal people. The princesses were literally the future of their people, walking around in royal dresses. The oldest one was called Lyria. She was smart and always asked her teachers questions that made them feel bad. Then there was Kendra, who was very good at strategy but loved art and music. Elena was a group scientist. She was always reading about other species and how they lived. Marissa, the youngest, was very good at languages and could talk to almost any alien race in their own language. They were everything the Valtheran people wanted to be. The royal family made a ceremonial trip through neutral space every year. It was a tradition that showed the galaxy that the Valtheran Empire was strong and sure of itself. The trip always went the same way, with a fleet of warships protecting it and every possible security measure in place. For 300 years, this tradition had never gone wrong, up until this year. The royal yacht was so fancy that it made other boats look like trash barges. The princesses were on board. It had guards all over the place, the best shields money could buy, and tracking systems that could tell you exactly where it was down to the centimeter. There were dozens of military cruisers around her daughters, and the queen herself was on a different flagship nearby. In the middle of the neutral zone, something that shouldn't have happened did. The yacht of the king just disappeared. There was on every scanner, every tracking screen, and every visual monitor for a second. Nothing happened the next moment. It was like someone had reached out and made it go away. The guards on the ships nearby freaked out. They ran every scan they had and looked at every system twice, then 3 times. Nothing. There is no debris field that suggests an explosion. There is no energy signature that shows a jump to hyperspace. There is no distress signal, no emergency signal. There was nothing there but empty space where a huge yacht had been floating just a few seconds before. When Queen Morgathia heard the news, people said she stood there like a statue for a moment. Then she started giving orders in a voice that made even the most experienced soldiers shiver. Every single military ship in the Empire was put to work right away. The lead was called off. Patrols were sent in a different direction. Within hours, thousands of warships were heading toward the neutral zone, looking at every inch of space. But they didn't find anything at all. The news couldn't be kept quiet. In less than a day, every government in the galaxy knew that the Valtheran princesses were missing. The Galactic Council had to meet in an emergency. The Valtheran Empire wasn't the only one with this problem anymore. If someone had the ability to make a heavily guarded royal yacht disappear without a trace, then no one was safe. Trade routes could be damaged. Ships used for diplomacy could disappear. There could be a threat to whole colonies. The Council unanimously agreed to help with the search. A dozen different empires sent ships to join the hunt. The Krylok Confederacy sent their best ships to track. The merchant guilds offered their huge network of spies all over the galaxy. The Techno Collective, which usually keeps to itself, even lent their advanced scanning tools. Trade routes were closed and each ship was searched. Every ship that came into or left a big port was boarded and checked from top to bottom. Station masters were told to check out every person who came through their doors. This was the first time the galaxy had seen a manhunt like this. Everyone was suspected. They caught pirates who worked in the neutral zones and asked them questions. None of them knew anything, and most were too scared to lie to the Valtheran questioners. Next, the government looked into rebel groups that were against the Empire. They searched their hideouts and questioned their leaders, but nothing came up again. Every lead led to a dead end. Checking on the other empires was also necessary, but it had to be done carefully so as not to start a war. We used diplomatic channels to ask for information and help. Some governments let Valtheran investigators into their land. Some people refused, but they did their own searches to show they had nothing to do with the disappearance. Nothing yet. Months turned into weeks. The Queen didn't get much sleep. Every day, she stood in her command center and watched reports come in from all over the galaxy. They all said the same thing. There were no signs of princesses. Her advisors were worried about her health, but no one would tell her to take a break. She wouldn't stop until she found her daughters, who were somewhere out there. The public's grief was too much to handle. People in Valtheran held candlelight vigils in every big city. People prayed in temples in 15 different star systems. Kids drew pictures of the princesses and left them by the palace gates. People had always seen those 4 young women as symbols of hope and progress. They were gone now. There was no progress for 6 months. The Queen's sadness slowly turned into something harder and more hopeless. She called another emergency meeting and made an announcement that shocked everyone in the galaxy. She was offering a reward for any information that would help her find her daughters. But this wasn't just money, titles, or land on a faraway planet. She was giving away a whole star system. And not just any system. The finder could choose from a number of options, each of which had several habitable planets, established colonies, billions of dollars in resources, and tax revenues that would make someone rich for generations. There was a lot of power and money. Some of her advisors told her this was too much, and that it would ruin the empire or start civil wars over who deserved the prize. She didn't care. Her daughters were worth more than whole star systems. The announcement changed everything. Bounty hunters who had been looking for smaller prizes suddenly focused all their efforts on finding the princesses. Companies of mercenaries were set up just to find them. People who had never left their home planets bought ships and scanning equipment to join the hunt for fortunes. Independent contractors, retired military officers, adventurers, and even people who were desperate to change their lives all went into space to look for 4 missing women. The mystery drove the whole galaxy crazy. People were talking about what happened at every bar, trading post, and station common area. Some people said that slavers had taken the princesses and were keeping them in the lawless outer territories. Some people said that a rival empire had taken them and was keeping them in a secret place. People had crazy ideas about aliens taking people, portals to other dimensions, and old technologies that could make ships disappear. But even with all the people looking for it, all the theories, and all the resources being used to solve the problem, nothing changed. The princesses were still missing. It was as if they had never existed, leaving behind only questions and a mother's broken heart. The cargo ship Drifter's end didn't look like much. It had more dents and scars on its hull than smooth metal, because it had been flying through asteroid fields, landing hard, and running into space debris for 20 years. The paint had faded to a dull gray that could have been blue at one time. One of the engine nacelles was making a grinding noise that would probably cost more to fix than the whole ship was worth. But the owner only cared that it flew. You would have walked right by Captain Jack Morrison without noticing him. He was in his early 40s, and his hair was getting gray at the temples. His face showed that he had been through a lot of long days. He was neither tall nor short, neither strong nor weak, and in every way that mattered, he was just average. He had been flying cargo routes for 15 years, ever since he left Earth to find something more interesting than the life he had there. He never found anything that really interested him, but he did find something better. He found a job that let him be alone when he wanted to and paid him just enough to get by. The Drifters then mostly sold industrial goods, parts that can be used to fix mining equipment, sending food to faraway colonies. Used machines that were too old for the core worlds, but still useful on the frontier. He sometimes carried people who needed to get somewhere without having to fill out official forms or answer a lot of questions. Jack learned early on that asking questions hurt business. People paid to get on board because they wanted privacy. They might have borrowed money from the wrong people. Maybe they were trying to get away from bad bosses or bad relationships. They might have just wanted their privacy. No matter what the reason was, Jack didn't ask. If you paid your fare and stayed out of trouble on his ship, he would take you where you needed to go. That's all there is to it. The frontier reaches were about as far from civilization as you could get without leaving the known universe. There weren't many stations out here. Most of them were mining outposts or refueling stations that helped independent prospectors and small businesses that couldn't afford to work closer to the core systems. One of these stations was called Last Hope, but no one could remember why. It was a floating group of modules that looked like they'd been put together by someone who didn't care much about following building codes. Jack had stopped there to fill up his tank and pick up a load of mining tools that were going to Colony 3 weeks away. 3 people came up to his table while he was eating at the station bar. The food tasted like recycled protein, which it probably was. They all had on full environmental suits, the kind that let you walk around in a vacuum if you needed to. He couldn't see their faces because the visors were dark. Their voices came through modulators that made them sound flat and electronic when they spoke. The person in front did the talking. "Are you Captain Morrison of the Drifter's End?" Jack nodded slowly, wondering what kind of trouble was about to come his way. "That's me. We need to get through to the independent zones. Quiet passage. We can pay well." Jack sat back in his chair. "How well?" The stranger put a small box on the table and opened it. There were 3 bars of pure platinum inside, each about the size of his thumb. Jack did his best to hide his surprise. That was a lot of money. Enough to keep his ship running for 3 months, with plenty left over for repairs and upgrades. He asked, "Where are you coming from?" "A research colony for businesses. We are academics who got caught up in a political situation that wasn't good for us. We have to leave this area completely." The story was thin, but Jack had heard thinner ones that turned out to be true. When things went wrong with the politics inside a corporate colony, things could get rough. Scientists who supported the wrong administrator or published the wrong findings sometimes had to run for their lives. 3 people on board. 3 months of passage. You stay in the guest quarters. Don't mess with my ship systems, and don't cause any problems. Deal. Okay. Jack picked up the case and stood up. "We're leaving in 4 hours. Docking Bay 7. The 3 passengers got there right on time and only had small bags with them. Jack led them to the guest rooms, which weren't very nice. 3 small cabins with bunk beds, a shared bathroom, and a common area with a table and some storage. The Drifter's End was a cargo ship, not a ship for people. There wasn't really any comfort in the package. Jack hardly saw them at all the first week. They stayed in their rooms with the door shut. They only left their rooms to eat and use the bathroom. Even inside the ship, where the air was fine, they still wore their suits all the time. Jack thought they were paranoid about being followed in some way. They might have thought he had scanning equipment that could find them. He didn't, but he let them be alone. Things started to change in the 2nd week. One of them, the one who had talked at the station, began to come out more often. She would sit in the common area and watch Jack check on the maintenance. The Drifter's End and other ships like it needed constant care. Things were always breaking, wearing out, or needing to be fixed. Jack spent a few hours every day going through systems, tightening connections, changing filters, and making sure everything was running smoothly. "Can I help you?" One day she asked. Jack stopped working on the panel and looked up. "Do you know anything about ships?" "No, but I can learn." He shrugged and gave her a wrench. "Hold this while I fix the coupling." She took the wrench and did what he told her to do. She kept helping for the next few days. After that, the other 2 joined in. They learned quickly. They asked good questions and remembered the answers. They could do basic maintenance tasks by themselves in 2 weeks. They also began to spend time in the little hydroponic garden that Jack kept on board. It wasn't much, just a few racks of growing trays where he grew vegetables and herbs to add to the dried and frozen food that made up most of his diet. It cost a lot to buy fresh food in space, but seeds and water were cheap if you had the space for them. The plants seemed to interest the people on the bus. They would spend hours taking care of them, changing the lights, checking the water levels, and carefully picking ripe vegetables. They began to take off their environmental suits around the 3rd week. First in their own rooms where Jack couldn't see them, but later in the common areas as well. They were all young women, probably in their 20s. One of them had long, dark hair that she usually wore up Another person had brown hair that was shorter and a serious face. The third one looked the youngest, with light hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. Jack didn't say anything about it. It was up to them if they felt safe enough to show their faces. He just kept flying his route, stopping at the right times to pick up and drop off cargo. People all over the galaxy were still talking about the missing Valtheran princesses. At every stop, people were talking about it, guessing what happened, and talking about the huge reward the Queen had offered. Jack only half listened to the gossip and didn't pay much attention. He didn't care about missing royalty, but his passengers seemed very interested in the news. When they were in port, they would watch the news in the common area and listen to every update. Jack thought they might just be bored. When you weren't used to them, long space trips got boring. During the long periods of time between star systems, they began to join him in the cockpit. These were the quiet times when the ship was going faster than light through empty space. There wasn't much to do other than keep an eye on the instruments and make sure nothing went wrong. Jack usually read or watched old movies from Earth during these hours. He had company now. They kept asking him about Earth. What was it like to grow up there? What did people eat? How did they run their own affairs? What kind of music did they like? How were their cities? Jack did his best to answer, but some of his memories were fuzzy because he had been gone from Earth for so long. He told them about the problems that people had to deal with, the wars and other bad things, the slow, painful climb to the stars. People were not special, advanced, or chosen for anything. They were just too stubborn to give up, no matter how bad things got point one day. While they were driving past a red dwarf star, he said, "We almost killed ourselves a dozen times. Climate change, nuclear weapons, pandemics, and AI, that doesn't work right. We did everything wrong. But we somehow kept going. Not because we were smart or meant to be great. Because we weren't the kind of people who would give up." The women seemed to find this very interesting. They asked him more questions, wanted more stories, and pushed him for more information about everyday life. What did families do together? How did people pick their jobs? What happened when someone messed up? Jack talked more than he had in years. He often went months without talking to anyone but himself and the ship's computer. It was strange, but not bad that there were real people on board who wanted to hear his stories. He told them about growing up in New York and how his parents worked regular jobs and saved up for years to send him to college. About how he had dropped out and let them down by going to space. About the years he spent working on other people's ships before he finally saved up enough money to buy his own. "It wasn't a big adventure," he said. "I didn't find new worlds or fight space pirates or any of that silly stuff. I only flew cargo and tried to pay my bills." Still doing the same thing 20 years later. "But you picked it," one of them said. She hadn't told him her name, but it was Lyria. They still hadn't told each other their real names. "You chose what your life would be." "I think so." For whatever that's worth, they began to make meals together. The galley on the drifter's end was very small, barely big enough for two people to stand in at once. But they made it work. Jack thought it was strange that the women had never cooked before, since they were academics. But they picked it up quickly, just like they did with the maintenance work. They tried different ways to mix the few ingredients they had, like the dried foods and fresh vegetables from the garden, in ways that Jack had never thought of before. Some attempts went horribly wrong, and no one could eat them. Some of the others turned out better than expected. They all laughed. That was the part that surprised me. Jack was used to flying alone in silence. Now his ship was full of people talking, laughing, and just living. They told jokes, but most of them were about cultures and species that Jack didn't know. He told his jokes, which were mostly bad puns and old Earth jokes that didn't always make sense. They still laughed. They slowly stopped being passengers and became something else, without Jack really noticing what happened. Not exactly friends, but not strangers either. They were just people sharing a ship and passing the time together as they traveled through the dark space between the stars. Jack had no idea who they really were. He didn't know that they were the most wanted people in the whole galaxy. He didn't know that thousands of ships were looking for them while he flew his normal routes with them in the cockpit, watching the stars go by. He knew they paid their fare, helped out on the ship, and were good company. That was enough sometimes. In this part of space, the Helios Junction was one of the busiest crossroads. There were a lot of trade routes that crossed here, and traffic control had a hard time keeping track of all the cargo ships, passenger ships, and military ships that were always coming and going. Jack had gone through there dozens of times before, without any problems. It was just another stop on his way, nothing special. Jack didn't even blink when the Valtheran Patrol cruiser lit up his communications panel with a standard inspection request. This happened a lot. After 6 months, the princesses were still missing, so every military force in the galaxy stepped up their inspection procedures. In the last 2 months, he had been stopped and searched at least 5 times. It was annoying, but not scary. "Hello, this is Captain Morrison of the Drifters, and," he said over the radio, "sending my list of passengers and cargo now. You can come on board to be checked out." He got up from his pilot's chair and stretched. Most of the time, these checks only took about 30 minutes. The soldiers would get on board, check the cargo hold, look at his papers, and maybe even look around the living quarters before leaving. Normal procedure. He walked back to the common area to tell his passengers what was going on. The 3 women were eating breakfast at the table. When Jack told them about the inspection, their faces went pale. They looked at each other with faces full of fear. They almost ran to their rooms before Jack could ask what was wrong. The door slid shut behind them with a hiss, and he heard the lock click into place. Jack was confused as he stood there. They had been through inspections before and hadn't acted like this. Why were they so scared now? His stomach felt cold. It could be that their story about being academics wasn't true. It's possible that they were criminals trying to get away from something bad. He thought about whether he should have asked more questions when they first hired him, but now it was too late. The patrol cruiser had already matched speed and was now extending its docking tube. Jack waited by the airlock. The clamps clicked into place, and the outer door opened. 6 Valtheran soldiers boarded in full combat gear, weapons drawn, but not aimed at anything yet. They moved like trained soldiers, spreading out to secure the area before their officer came through. The woman who was an officer was very tall and had a face that looked like she had never smiled before. She looked at Jack and didn't care at all. "Captain Morrison, this will be a normal checkup. Stay here while my team looks for you." "Not a problem," Jack said, trying to sound casual even though he was nervous. The troops went their separate ways. 2 people went to look at the cargo hold. 2 more went to the engine room. The last 2 moved toward the living quarters, taking out bioscanners as they went. These gadgets could see through walls and tell what kind of life was inside by looking at its unique biological signature. It was easy and quick to tell what species they were, because their DNA had different markers. Jack saw the soldiers look around the empty common area before heading toward the passenger quarters. One of them aimed a scanner at the door that was locked. As it worked, the device made its usual soft beeping sounds. Then the beeping changed. It got fast and high-pitched, like it was going crazy. The soldier was confused as he looked down at his scanner. Then the device made a loud alarm sound that echoed throughout the ship. The soldier really did fall back, as if he had been hit. His partner ran over, and they both looked at the scanner screen. Jack couldn't see what it was, but it made both soldiers freeze in shock. "Sir," one of them yelled at the officer, "right now you need to see this." The officer walked over quickly, and her face went from bored to alert in an instant. She looked at the scanner, and her eyes got big. She stood there for a moment, frozen. After that, she picked up her communicator and started to speak quickly in the Valtheran language. She sounded tight, like she was trying to keep her excitement or fear in check. In less than 2 minutes, the whole patrol cruiser was ready for battle. Jack could see through the viewport that the ship's weapons were getting ready to fire, and its shield generators were starting to glow. The officer was still talking quickly into her communicator, and now she sounded almost crazy. Jack asked, "What's going on? What did you find?" No one answered him. The soldiers now had their guns raised, and they were all aimed at the locked passenger quarters. The officer finished talking and turned to Jack with a look on her face that was hard to read. It could have been rage, surprise, or something else. "Captain Morrison, right now, I need you to open that door. My passengers have a right to keep things private. They paid for, let us in or we'll cut through it. It's up to you." Jack didn't really have a choice. He walked over and typed in his captain's override code. The door opened when the lock came loose. The three women were sitting on one of the bunks inside, holding hands. They looked scared, but also like they had given up, as if they knew this day would come. The officer looked at them for a long time. Then she slowly knelt down, and the other soldiers did the same. Jack had no idea what was going on. "Your Highnesses," the officer said in a voice full of respect, "we've been looking for you for 6 months." Jack's brain couldn't understand what he was hearing. "Your Highness?" These were the scholars who were running away from political persecution. These were the people who had helped him fix broken pipes, laughed at his bad jokes, and learned how to cook in his tiny kitchen. They couldn't be royal. But the officer was already back on her radio, and this time she sounded even more urgent. Jack heard a few words that made his heart race. "Princesses. Queen. Fleet of battleships." "Wait," he said. "Hold on, what's going on? Who are they?" No one answered. The officer was too busy making sure everything was going smoothly outside. Jack went to a window and looked out. He saw something that made his legs weak. Ships were coming. A lot of ships. They were coming out of hyperspace in flashes of light, one after the other, until there were dozens of them around his small freighter. These were not patrol boats. These were ships of war. Big battle cruisers with a lot of weapons. Carriers that could hold hundreds of soldiers. Destroyers with cannons that could break through the crust of a planet. In less than an hour, Jack was looking at a fleet that could have taken over a whole solar system, and they were all aimed at his ship. A new voice came over the radio. It was deep and authoritative. "Admiral Vectos of the Valtheran Imperial Fleet here. Captain Morrison, you must give up yourself and your ship right away. Anyone who resists will be killed." Jack's hands were shaking as he spoke. "I'm not fighting anything. I don't even know what's going on. You will be taken to the flagship to be questioned. Do not try to escape or hurt the royal hostages." "People held hostage? Where are the hostages?" "I don't have any," Jack said, but then he stopped as understanding hit him like a wave. He turned to look at the three women who were now standing in the doorway of their room, surrounded by soldiers. "You are the princesses of Valtheran, the ones that everyone has been looking for." Lyria nodded slowly because he had learned her name over the past few months, even though she had never confirmed it. "Yes. And you were on my ship for 6 months while everyone in the galaxy was looking for you." "Yes." Jack thought he might pass out. He fell into a chair and sat down hard. "I'm going to die for kidnapping royalty." Another person said, "You didn't kidnap us." He thought her name was Kendra. "We hired you. We paid you to get through." Jack said weakly, "That's not how this looks." A group of people from the flagship came to board. These weren't regular troops. They wore the black armor of the Royal Guard, which is the Queen's own army. Without saying a word, they surrounded Jack and put him in restraints. The guards didn't listen when the princesses tried to speak up. Jack was marched through the docking tube and into the huge flagship. Along the way, people stopped to stare at him like he was a monster. They took him to what looked like an interrogation room and forced him into a chair. The restraints kept him in place. Then he sat and waited, and waited. His mind was racing as he tried to figure out how his simple job of hauling cargo had turned into the biggest problem in the galaxy. At last, the door opened. Jack couldn't count all the medals and insignia on the man's admiral's uniform when he walked in. He was tall and strong, with gray hair and a face that looked like it was made of stone. Admiral Vectos was in charge of the Queen's army. Jack had seen his face on TV news. People knew him for never losing a battle and being merciless to enemies of the Empire. The Admiral stood in front of Jack for a long time, just looking at him. His face showed that he was very angry but was trying to hide it. "How did you do that?" Vectos asked in a low voice. "What do you want to do? Don't mess with me, human. How did you get 4 royal princesses away from a whole fleet of ships that were supposed to protect them? What kind of technology did you use? Who helped you? What company do you work for?" Jack shook his head in a desperate way. "I didn't take anyone hostage. They came to me at a trading post and paid me to take them there. I thought they were academics who were running away from problems at work. They used platinum to pay. I didn't ask any questions and flew my usual route. That was all that happened. You want to believe that the people who will inherit the Valtheran throne just walked up to you and hired you like any other passenger. I don't care what you think. That is what happened. Vectos bent down until his face was only a few inches from Jack's. You will tell me the truth, or you will spend the rest of your very short life wishing you had. The door opened again before Jack could say anything. The princesses walked in wearing royal robes that someone must have brought from the flagship storage. They looked more like queens and less like the young women who had helped him keep his ship in good shape when they were dressed up. Admiral, Lyria said in a voice that Jack had never heard from her before. This man is telling you the truth. We were not taken hostage. We paid Captain Morrison to take us. He didn't know who we were. He didn't do anything wrong. Vectos turned to look at them, and his face softened a little. Your Highness, with all due respect, you haven't been seen in 6 months. You must be confused, or maybe you have Stockholm Syndrome. This person is clearly. We were not kidnapped. All 4 princesses said at the same time, their voices strong. There was no sound in the room. Vectos looked back and forth between the princesses and Jack, and for the first time his face showed that he was confused. Then why did you go away? Why have you been hiding on this ship? Everyone in the galaxy has been looking for you. We know, Lyria said in a low voice. We left on purpose. We will explain everything. But first you have to let Captain Morrison go. He is not guilty. The news spread faster than light could. Within hours, every news station in the galaxy was covering the same impossible story. They had found the missing Valtheran princesses alive and, well, on a human cargo ship. They were not taken against their will. They had gone on their own. They had been hiding in plain sight for 6 months with a human captain who didn't know who they were. The galaxy went crazy trying to figure out how this could happen. Jack Morrison, a nobody from Earth who moved cargo, had been flying around with the most wanted people in the universe without even knowing it. The command deck on the flagship was huge. It was meant to coordinate whole fleets of ships during wartime. Now it was a stage for something else entirely. The room was full of fleet commanders from all over the Valtheran Empire, as well as members of the Galactic Council and ambassadors from a dozen different civilizations. There were cameras set up at every angle, and they were broadcasting live to trillions of people across known space. Jack sat off to the side with guards, still not sure if he was going to be killed. The princesses were in the middle of it all, wearing their royal robes but looking different from other royalty he had seen on TV. They stood up straighter and looked more sure of themselves, as if they had learned something while they were gone. Lyria went first to say something. She was the oldest and the one who worked out a deal with Jack to get to the trading station months ago. As she spoke to the crowd and the billions of people watching from across the galaxy, her voice was clear and steadied at MY Sisters, and I disappeared 6 months ago during our ceremonial voyage. The whole galaxy has been looking for us and coming up with theories about kidnapping and conspiracy. The truth is both easier and harder than anyone thought. They didn't take us. We went away. We got away. There was a murmur among the commanders who were there. Some of them looked at each other in a confused way. Admiral Vectos was near the front, and it was hard to tell what he was thinking. Lyria went on. You need to know what it means to be Valtheran royalty in order to understand why we did this. We didn't come into being in a natural way. Before we were even born, scientists made our DNA in labs. Scientists took the best parts from thousands of genetic sequences and made us perfect. More powerful, more intelligent, heals faster, and lives longer. We are not people in the same way that most beings are. We are genetic experiments meant to help our species evolve. She stopped talking, and her sister Kendra stepped in to finish the story. We were taught from the time we could walk. Not taught, trained. By the time we were 5, we could speak 17 languages. By the time we were 7, we had learned the whole history of our empire. We learned about war, diplomacy, science, art, and anything else our teachers thought we should know. But we didn't pick any of it. We didn't have choices. Next, Elena spoke. We lived in the crystal towers in the middle of the capital. Pretty buildings that were basically jails. We couldn't leave without permission and an armed guard. We weren't allowed to talk to regular people. We couldn't make friends with anyone outside of the small group of other royal kids who were also stuck like we were. We had a schedule for every moment of our lives, and someone was always watching and controlling us. The youngest, Marissa, told the story next. We were told we were unique. Someone told us we were the future of our kind. We were told that our DNA would be used to make the next generation of Valtheran people, which would make everyone stronger and better. They made it sound like a big deal. It took us years to figure out that they were talking about us like breeding stock and not people with their own lives and dreams. Lyria took over once more. Our goal was clear. We would grow up. Our DNA would be used for genetic engineering programs. We would marry whoever the council thought would make the best children, and we would spend our lives being perfect examples of how great Valtheran was. We could never fail, never be normal, and never just live without the weight of our whole species on our shoulders. She stared right into the camera. I went to a small trade summit on one of our outer colony worlds a year ago. It was meant to be a formality, just a way for the royal family to show up and make the colonists feel important. There were merchants from many different types of animals there selling their goods. A lot of them were scared of me. They would bow and speak in careful, practiced words. But there was one person there who didn't seem impressed at all. Jack shifted in his seat uncomfortably when he realized she was talking about him. He could barely remember the trade summit. He had gone there to try to sell some used farming tools to the colonial farmers. I went up to his stall because I was curious, Lyria said. He was selling used and repaired farming tools, not anything new or fancy. I asked him about his job, expecting him to give me the usual compliments and careful answers. He just shrugged and said it was fine, though not great, not bad, just okay. He said he moved cargo, made enough money to keep his ship going, and went where he wanted. He said he had never really thought about it when I asked him if he was happy. He said that his life was his own, and that was good enough. She smiled when she thought of it. That simple answer stayed with me for weeks. This was a person from a species that didn't have genetic engineering, a grand destiny, or an empire that spanned star systems. Just a person living his life the way he wanted to. After that, I began to look into humanity. I learned about their past, their problems, and how they didn't have anything that made them special by galactic standards. Kendra took up the story. Humans almost wiped themselves out many times. They fought awful wars. They made their own planet sick. They made weapons that could have wiped out their own kind. They did everything wrong. They didn't survive because they were made to be perfect. They did because they changed and kept trying. They were free to fail and free to learn from those failures. Elena said they had the freedom to choose more than that. Everyone chooses their own way. Some people become scientists, some become farmers, and some become cargo haulers who fly alone through space. They can change their minds, make mistakes, waste their potential, or do better than anyone expected. They can choose. We realized we had never had that before. Before we were even born, our lives were set. Marissa spoke in a low voice. We started making plans to get away. We knew it would lead to a crisis. We knew our mom would be heartbroken. We knew that the galaxy would freak out. But we also knew that if we didn't do this, we would always be symbols and specimens, never real people with real choices. Lyria looked at Jack, who was doing everything he could to not look back. I remembered the human cargo ship from the trade summit. Captain Morrison seemed like the kind of person who wouldn't ask questions and wouldn't treat us like royalty if he didn't know we were royalty. We used our access to royal money to buy platinum bars. We made up fake identities as academics who were running away from corporate persecution. We planned every last detail of our escape. She looked back at the cameras. We didn't disappear on the day we did because of some advanced technology. We just got off our royal yacht at a neutral station where it was scheduled for maintenance. We had sent most of our guards ahead on fake missions. The few who stayed behind thought we were in our own rooms. We had already changed into environmental suits and were meeting Captain Morrison at a trading post 3 systems away by the time anyone noticed we were gone. Admiral Vectos couldn't keep quiet any longer. Your Highness, why didn't you just ask for more freedom? The council would have thought about. No, they wouldn't have. Lyria said firmly. We fought for years to get more freedom. Every request was turned down. We were too important, too valuable, and too much of a symbol. They would never have let us leave. We had to take our freedom because no one would ever give it to us. She turned around to talk to everyone in the room. Captain Morrison let us on his ship because he thought we were who we said we were. 3 professors running away from trouble. He didn't ask any questions. He gave us basic quarters and then went back to work. That was exactly what we needed. Kendra grinned. For the first time in our lives, no one was always watching us. No one was looking at what we were doing. No one was planning out every minute of our day. We were just passengers on a cargo ship that didn't have to go anywhere important. At first, it was very scary. We didn't know what to do with ourselves. Elena went on. Captain Morrison didn't think much of us. He didn't make us feel special. He treated us like regular people who were taking up space on his ship. He gave us tools and showed us what to do when we asked for help with repairs. He corrected us when we made mistakes, but he didn't make a big deal out of it. He just nodded and moved on when we did well. We learned how to keep ship systems running. Marissa said, we learned how to grow food in the garden without soil. We learned how to cook, but our first few meals were so bad that even Captain Morrison couldn't eat them. We learned how it feels to fail at something without it being a big deal. We learned how it felt to get better by practicing instead of by genetic programming. Lyria's voice got louder. We lived like normal people for 6 months. We fought over who should clean the shared space. We had a contest to see who could grow the biggest tomatoes. We stayed up late watching supernovas through the cockpit window, but no one told us the right way to enjoy celestial events. We just lived, and it was the best thing that ever happened to us. She was now looking right at Jack. Captain Morrison gave us something that our empire never could. He gave us who we are, not the genetically perfect princesses made to help our species grow, not the signs of Valtheron's greatness. Only us, for young women learning who they really were when no one told them who they had to be. Jack wanted to go away. Everyone in the room was looking at him now. He hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. He had just let them help him with his ship and shared his bad jokes and meals with them. What made that worth all the attention? Lyria spoke to the galaxy one last time. We are going back to work. We know what we owe to our people, but we are coming back as different people. We have learned that the goal is not to be perfect. It is growth. It's a choice. Life is worth living because you can be flawed and normal and still be valued. People showed that. They fell from their one world to the stars not because they were perfect, but because they could try, fail, and try again. She stopped for a moment to let her words sink in. For thousands of years, our empire has been breeding itself for perfection. We have gotten rid of weakness, made intelligence as high as it can go, and lengthened lives. But we have also taken away something very important. We have gotten rid of the messy, chaotic, and unpredictable parts of real life. We have taken away choice. Without choice, though, perfection is just another prison. There was no noise in the room. Even the tough military leaders seemed to be touched by what she said. Lyria looked at her sisters, and they all nodded in agreement. We want to change the way Valtheran royalty is raised and trained. We want people in the future to have options, to see what life is like outside the crystal towers, to learn from other species, especially people, about how important it is to be free and make your own decisions. Genetic perfection should be a tool that helps us find more options, not a cage that keeps us on a single path. She turned to look directly at Admiral Vectos. And there will be no punishment for Captain Morrison. He didn't do anything wrong. He was kind to us without expecting anything in return. He was nice to us even though he didn't know who we were. He showed the galaxy the best of what people can do. He should be honored, not put in jail. The show was over, but people all over the galaxy would be thinking about what they had heard for months. The most powerful empire in known space had just said that its perfect princesses had left to live on a cargo ship with a human, and they were better off because of it. 3 days after the show, Queen Morgathia came. Her personal flagship was a ship so big that it made all the other ships in the fleet look small. It looked like it blocked out the stars when it came out of hyperspace. This ship was meant to scare people and remind them that the Valtheran Empire was the most powerful in this part of space. Jack watched through a window as the Queen's shuttle left the flagship and headed for the ship where her daughters were waiting. He had heard things about Queen Morgathia. She had been in charge for more than 60 years, growing the empire, putting down rebellions, and keeping her people in line with an iron fist. Everyone who had ever met her said she was smart, cruel, and very scary. Jack was sure that she was going to have him killed, no matter what her daughters said. There were guards in ceremonial armor around the Queen when she got on board. The armor probably cost more than Jack's whole ship. She was tall like her daughters and had silver hair that used to be dark. Her eyes seemed to see through everything they looked at. The robes she wore were both beautiful and scary at the same time. This was a person who had led armies across star systems and commanded millions of people. She walked with complete confidence, as if gravity itself was bending to her will. The princesses were waiting for her in the main conference room. Jack had also been brought there, but he was standing off to the side with guards around him. He was doing everything he could to not be seen, but it wasn't working. Queen Morgathia stopped in front of her daughters and stared at them for a long time. Jack thought there would be yelling, crying, or some other dramatic fight. The Queen, on the other hand, looked at them like she was seeing them for the first time. She said finally in a cold, controlled voice, "You have caused quite a crisis." "Yes, we know," Lyria said. She spoke in a respectful but firm way. She wasn't scared or sorry. She stood up straight and looked her mother in the eye. "The whole galaxy has been looking for you for 6 months. Instead of being used to run our empire, resources were wasted on a huge manhunt. Our enemies saw us as weak. Our friends doubted our ability. And you were hiding on a cargo ship and eating vegetables from a hydroponic garden." "Yes, Mom." The Queen's eyes got smaller. "Why?" Lyria didn't think twice. "We needed to know who we were outside of being your daughters and future genetic donors. We had to live like regular people and make our own decisions. We needed freedom, even if it was only for a little while." "Freedom." The Queen said the word like it tasted bad. "You are a king or queen. You don't get to be free. You have to take care of a whole civilization, and you have to do your duty. That's what you were made for." "We weren't born," Kendra said softly. "We were made in a lab to meet certain standards. There's a difference." The Queen looked sharply at her second daughter. "You were made to be the best thing our species could make. That would be an honor for most people." Elena said, "Most people get to choose their own paths. We never did. Before we were even born, every moment of our lives was planned. We just wanted to be able to make our own decisions, even little ones." For a moment, Queen Morgathia was quiet. Then she looked at Jack, who wanted more than anything to sink into the floor. "And you, the person who carried people across the ocean and somehow ended up at the center of Valtheron's biggest crisis ever. What did you do to my daughters?" Jack swallowed hard. "I let them through to the independent zones, just like they paid me to. That's IT bias that all." The Queen's voice was dangerously soft. "You just happened to move the 4 most important people in my empire for 6 months without knowing who they were? Your Majesty, I don't pay attention to news about the royal family. I move things. They said they were scholars. I trusted them. We got along well, and they helped with ship maintenance. I didn't know they were princesses until your soldiers looked at my ship. And what did you teach them over the course of these 6 months? What ideas about people did you put in their heads?" Jack blinked in confusion. "I didn't teach them anything. We just lived on the same ship. I taught them how to grow tomatoes and fix pipes. We talked about things that are normal. They asked me to tell them stories about Earth and people. So I did. That was it. Just stories," the Queen said again, her voice full of doubt. "Yes, Your Majesty. Tales that show how people aren't unique. How we almost killed ourselves many times. How we lived thanks to luck and stubbornness, not because we were better than anyone else. How we accidentally ended up in space because we were curious, not because we were meant to be great." Jack was talking too much now, and his words were coming out in a nervous way. "I told him the truth. People are normal. We make mistakes all the time. We don't always succeed. But we keep trying anyway because we can choose our own paths, even if they don't lead to anything great." The Queen looked at him for a long time. Then, Out of nowhere, something that could have been a smile touched the corner of her mouth. You taught my perfect daughters that it was okay to be normal. I didn't mean to teach them anything, Your Majesty. All we did was talk. Just talking. The Queen turned back to her girls. Is this real? This person did nothing but treat you like regular passengers on his ship? Yes, Mother, Lyria said. That was just what we needed. Someone who didn't think of us as genetic miracles or royal symbols. Someone who thought we were just 3 people who needed a ride. Captain Morrison got mad when we were too loud. He laughed when we set dinner on fire. He taught us how to fix things that broke. That was the best gift anyone has ever given us. He treated us like we were normal. The Queen walked slowly to a window and looked out at the stars. Her guard stayed still, but Jack could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was curious about what she would do. The Queen said, I made you perfect, without turning around. I used the best genetic science that our civilization had come up with. I gave you benefits that took our species thousands of years to get. I kept you safe, taught you, and got you ready for the roles you would play in helping our people move forward. You gave it all up to live on a cargo ship and learn how to grow tomatoes. We didn't throw anything away, Lyria said with confidence. We went off the beaten path to learn something that our perfect education never taught us. We learned about making choices, about failing and getting better, about being valued for who we are, not what our DNA says we should be. When the Queen turned around, Jack was surprised to see that her face had softened a little. When I was a kid, before I became Queen, I wanted to be an explorer. I wanted to find new worlds and map star systems that no one else knew about. But I was a royal, and royals don't get to chase their dreams. They get their thrones and duties from their parents. I've been a good ruler for 60 years. But I will always remember what I gave up. She walked back to stand in front of her daughters. You left girls hiding in a golden cage. You come back as women who chose to leave that cage, knowing what would happen. You found out how much freedom costs and chose to pay it. Maybe that's a better education than anything I could have given. The princesses were surprised to see each other. None of them thought this would happen. You will go back to your duties, the Queen said in a more formal tone. You will have to go through medical tests to make sure you are healthy. You will have to face the council and explain what you did. You will have to deal with the results of what you did. But you will also be able to suggest changes to how royal children are raised in the future. If you think our system needs to change, you need to convince the council. Teach them that what you learn from people is important for all of us. Lyria stood up even straighter. We will, Mom. Thanks. The Queen nodded and then looked back at Jack. He did his best not to flinch when she looked at him. Now, Captain Morrison, what about you? I promised a whole star system as a reward for bringing my daughters back. You found them, whether you wanted to or not. You get the prize. Pick any system in Valtheran space, and you will get it with full governing rights. Jack's mouth dropped open. He couldn't even begin to imagine how rich and powerful an entire star system would be. Planets, resources, people, and tax money. He would never have to carry things again. He could live like a king for the rest of his life. But then he thought about what that would mean. Running populations, running economies, making choices that had an impact on millions of people, going to council meetings and diplomatic events, living in fancy buildings with guards following him around all the time. It sounded just like the prison the princesses had broken out of. Thank you, Your Majesty, Jack said slowly, but I don't want a star system. The Queen raised an eyebrow. No one says no to a reward like this. I don't mean to be rude, Your Majesty. I just have a ship and a route that work well for me. I know how to move things. I know how to fix things that are broken. I know how to be alone in space and not have anyone else around. I don't know how to run a star system, and to be honest, it sounds awful. Just keep doing what I know how to do, I said. Queen Morgathia laughed for the first time since she got there. It was a short sound that was real and surprised. You're either the smartest person I've ever met or the dumbest. I can't choose between the two, to Your Majesty. This is probably a bad idea, but I have to make the choice. Yes, it is. The Queen thought for a while. Then take this instead. a formal pardon for any crimes that were thought to have happened, a letter of marque that guarantees safe passage through all of Valtheron space without being searched or taxed, and enough money to fix and improve your cargo ship the right way. It looked like it was about to fall apart. Jack smiled even though he was nervous. That sounds a lot better, Your Majesty. Thank you. Plans were made over the next few days. The princesses got ready to go back home. Jack filled out the right forms for his pardon and got his letter of marque. This was an official document with so many stamps and seals that it looked more like art than legal papers. He also got a payment that would let him fix all the problems with the Drifter's End and still have a lot of money left over. The 4 princesses came to his ship one last time on the day he was supposed to leave. They were once again dressed in their royal robes, looking every bit like the important people they were. But they also seemed different in some way, more confident in themselves, more at ease with who they are. We wanted to say goodbye the right way. Lyria said, "You gave us something that will stay with us for the rest of our lives." Jack said, "I just gave you a ride, in an awkward way." "You gave us 6 months of being treated like normal people," Kendra said. "That is worth more than any amount of genetic perfection." Elena said, "You showed us that being human isn't about DNA or fate. It's about making choices, learning from your mistakes, and being happy with the little things." Marissa smiled. "You taught us that it's okay to not be perfect. That was the most important thing I learned." Jack didn't know how to respond to that. He had just been himself and going about his business. But for some reason, that was just what they needed. He finally said, "You were never perfect. You were just people trying to figure out who you wanted to be, just like everyone else in the galaxy." Lyria stepped up and gave him a quick hug. It was totally wrong by royal standards, but she didn't seem to care. "Thanks, Captain Morrison, for everything." One by one, the others hugged him too. After that, they got off his ship and went back to their own. Jack watched them leave and felt strange about the whole thing. They had been unknown passengers 6 months ago. Now, they were the most well-known people in the galaxy, and he had been a part of their story. He turned on the Drifter's End and did the checks he needed to do before flying. Thanks to the new repairs, everything was going well for once. He planned a route back to the trade routes where he usually worked. There was cargo that needed to be moved, people who needed things moved, and a huge galaxy full of places to go. He looked back one last time at the huge fleet that surrounded the Queen's flagship as he turned on the hyperspace drive. For princesses were starting their journey back to duty and responsibility somewhere on board. But now they were different. They had learned what it was like to be free, and that knowledge would stay with them forever. As the stars turned into lines and his ship jumped to hyperspace, Jack smiled to himself. He was just a truck driver, nothing special about him. But for 6 months, he had given 4 of the most important people in the galaxy something they could never have gotten any other way. He had given them a chance to be normal. And sometimes, that was the most important thing in the world.